This podcast is sponsored by St. Francis Regional Medical Center. St. Francis Southbridge Urgent Care is open during convenient daytime, evening, and weekend hours. Friendly providers can treat you on a walk-in basis, and Southbridge Urgent Care also offers free online check-in, so you can wait for your appointment in the comfort of your own home. Southbridge Urgent Care is conveniently located in Shakopee across from Sam's Club. Visit stfrancis-shakopee.com/urgent care for details. Hi, and welcome to the Shakopee Chamber Podcast. My name is Angie Whitcomb. I'm the president and CEO of the Shakopee Chamber Visitors Bureau, and I am pleased to welcome you to this little podcast today. We started this podcast back in June as a way of connecting with our members in a time when getting together in person was not encouraged. So I want to thank our sponsors, because without them, this wouldn't be happening. Our friends at St. Francis Regional Medical Center, thank you so much for your generous sponsorship. And if you are interested in being a sponsor of this podcast, there are opportunities available. Just reach out to one of the team here at the Chamber and we'll make sure you get all you need to help promote your business. Believe it or not, a few people listen to this show, so I'm very excited about that. We're going to dive right in today because we have a lot to cover with today's guest because he knows it all. Our guest today is Doug Loon, president of the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce. Doug, thanks so much for accepting our invitation today.
Thank you, Angie. It's great to be with you. And congratulations on doing a podcast. It's a great way to stay connected when it's, harder to stay connected.
Yeah. Well, I figured if I'm going to be on Zoom all the time, we may as well do something fun with it. So
this will be fun today. Is that what you're saying?
It's going to be a lot of fun. So buckle up.
Great.
So Doug, I was reading your bio last night and I've known you since I started here at the Chamber and I thought I knew about you, but you have been influencing public policy for the business community since you left Augustana about 100 years ago. No offense.
Yes. 101, actually.
101. Okay, let's go through this. Like, you spent 10 years on Capitol Hill serving as the legislative director for Arlen Specter. You were staff director for the Senate Committee on Veterans Affairs, the Senate Commerce Committee, and then you just moved down the street to H Street, where you had a great 20-year career at the U.S. Chamber, serving as their director of congressional and public affairs, and then serving as one of the chief lobbyists before Congress on issues critical to the American business community. And then 5 years ago, this month, happy anniversary, you assumed your role at the Chamber. So, Doug, clearly you have a passion to fight for business. I have to ask you where this came, where you get this, because in my mind, I flash back to the hospital all those many years ago, and the doctor says, "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Loon, it's a boy." Camera pans to the baby, and the baby's like, "I would love to stay for photos, but I've got to go fight the fight." I mean, like, this is a life. Most people have lots of careers. Yeah. You have a path. Tell me how you got interested in this.
Well, thank you, Angie. It's not a question I get often, but my wife and I both have a passion for public service. Mm-hmm. She more so than me as a former elected official. Mm-hmm. Mine began with my grandfather, who was truly a serial entrepreneur. Mm-hmm. Coming out of the Depression era, he was in and out of businesses and was very passionate about it. And that instilled a sense in me that you can do things and have impact in the business community is a great way to do it. My parents were also very civically minded. They were huge volunteers in the community. Very influential. I grew up in a little town in Mitchell, South Dakota. So if you've been driving out to the Black Hills and you stopped at the Corn Palace, yes, that's home. But we've been here in Minnesota now 22 years, and so we consider it home. I found my way to Washington after I was soul searching in college and found engagement in policy as really, really a fascinating part of our American fabric. And I wanted to be part of that. So I found my way there, and I had some very rewarding experiences on Capitol Hill. And then I was recruited to go to work for the business community. Mm-hmm. And I knew I needed to kind of move on from Capitol Hill. And I chose the Chamber partly because, or they chose me and I accepted, partly because I knew the brand. Mm-hmm. And I didn't want to, as a person trying to influence the legislature, Congress, of having to go in and say, here's who I represent. Mm-hmm. When you go in with the Chamber brand, they largely know what you represent, and that is quickly moved on, and it has a credible, influential voice that we need to nurture and protect, like you do in Shakopee, and we do at the state level. But we know that we represent a broader objective, and that is, how do we foster a strong private sector?
Yeah.
That inspires me every day, as it does you in Shakopee. Because if we're not fighting on behalf of the private sector to help businesses start, grow, and stay in Minnesota, our state isn't as successful. And yet we always have challenges. We're always pushing against some forces that are working against us. But at the same time, we find partnerships where we can and develop those and make Minnesota a better place to be in business.
Yeah. Well, I think you could have maybe left a page from your book when you left Capitol Hill. I think a few others should move on. I think term limits that's a whole different podcast conversation. What I want to talk about today is economic recovery. I mean, you talk about, fighting the good fight and, pushing hard for issues, and nothing like 2020 to just throw a wrench in all of that and create an even more important need for that. So one of the things the Minnesota Chamber has done, and I believe this is through the foundation, is you've come up with your chamber dashboard for economic recovery. And I was perusing through that last night, and there's some great information on there. Minnesota, our unemployment rate is down. We're lower than the national average of that, and that trend seems to be going in the right direction. But then there's a lot of things like small business revenue and small business starts. And so, it tells kind of two stories. Talk to me about particularly, the takeaways from that dashboard, why people should go there and what they should walk away feeling.
Yeah, we launched this as part of our effort to restore our state's economy. And if you actually look prior to COVID, we were seeing signs of economic slowdown here in Minnesota, actually slower than the rest of the country. And there were a couple of things creating headwinds for us. One was, we believe, our tax and regulatory climate, but also our workforce was probably the key driver of why we were potentially not growing as fast as we could. Most of the growth pre-COVID was occurring on the two coasts, largely around technology growth, vast technology growth, which we participate in here in Minnesota, but not at the scale they do. So we were seeing greater growth in those markets, those states that have a stronger concentration of technology development. We are an innovative state. We have had that construct of being an innovative state combined with a very capable workforce has been our ingredients. I call it the secret sauce of our success. So we've had those. They're not as strong as they once were relative to other states. So we were having a conversation about how do we nurture those back into the forefront? How do we make sure we remove some of these headwinds to our own success? And that's some of the work of the chamber. And then COVID hit. And then the equation became economic recovery in more of a shorter term. Now, Minnesota has done historically well when we go into a recession. And we come out quickly. And we come out quickly because of those assets of our state that I just spoke about. But it's also about the diversity of our economy. We don't rely on one sector. We're not just manufacturing cars. We're a natural resource-based economy, but at the same time, we're incredibly innovative, and we have this great workforce. So we have these legacy companies, and we're pretty good at building companies, starting companies and building them up. We're not good at attracting companies. So, something we need to think hard about. But we're really good at building them and nurturing them. And then our goal is, how do we retain them? How do we keep them in Minnesota? So fast forward, then we created this dashboard of benchmarks, and we like it because the economy is moving so quickly that your traditional annual review of where we are is inadequate. We're moving so quickly that we felt the dashboard was needed to look at key indexes that come out on a monthly basis or even biweekly basis, and so we're updating this in real time. So as soon as data comes in, it goes in there. So we just saw an update on unemployment. We were seeing significant, unemployment back in March and April, but not as deep as some. But if you looked at the sectors that were hit really hard, think hospitality, right? And that has not fully recovered. And so that continues to be part of our economy that's not fully open. We can come back and talk about COVID and the response of the state to COVID because that contributes to our economic recovery.
Yeah. Well, and you bring up hospitality. I mean, unarguably, they're one of the hardest hit industries. I mean, they've been open, but I don't think any of them have had a day where their financials are in the black. So they're running in the red for how many months, but they're still open, trying to fight the fight.
Right.
And now we've got these sting operations from DPS. I don't know if you're hearing it from your members, but I'm hearing it from mine. They are beyond frustrated and feel offended and feel picked on. How are they going to recover? I mean, what is your data telling you about that?
Right. They're at 50% capacity. They're among the businesses with the tightest margins, profit margins to begin with. And by the way, businesses can't operate unless they have some form of profit. They can't rely on reserves very long. They can't rely on government support forever. And then they have workforce issues. Yeah. So lots of things pushing hard against those consumer-facing businesses. But as it turns out with COVID, those consumer-facing businesses are those that are most susceptible to spread of the virus, and so therefore they've been a focus, if you will, of enforcement. Plus, it captures headlines, so there's always this kind of sense of, who's the most at fault in this. And for a while, it was hard to go after family gatherings. Now that seems to be an area of focus too. Yeah. Schools, clearly an area of focus. So anytime you have large gatherings of people, think about chambers. That's what we do too, right? We're in this space too. So here's the thing: we if COVID is one of those things that will spread until there is a solution, right? Meaning communities or herd immunity through a vaccination is the best approach. Until we have that, we're in this mode of trying to resist the spread of the virus. I look at some fundamental indicators every day, and the ones that I look at the most are hospitalization and ICU beds being taken, and we're at a relatively manageable percentage in both categories right now. So I would say Minnesota has learned to manage the virus as opposed to the virus managing us. And go ahead.
No, go ahead. I want to jump back to that and I was going to get to this later on. You talk about how Minnesota has found a way to manage it. And there seems to be some retrospective thinking on the governor's part, at least according to the papers lately. And now he's saying that there may be benchmarks for, and I've got to get to my notes on this page because I'm jumping ahead, but you brought it up. So, if we hit certain benchmarks with the pandemic, he'll reopen us. And I think it was less than 20% of community spread and a positivity rate under 4. And so as of
pretty high hurdles. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, as of last week, we're at 35% and a positivity rate of 4.8. So is getting below that even attainable? And what's with the door-to-door knocking on the door to take a test out of the back of a minivan? I mean, that's just going to jump those numbers. We'll never get out of this. And what does that mean?
It pushes both ways. We want testing because that brings certainty to the marketplace, which we really want, especially for essential businesses and high-risk individuals, first responders in particular. So we want robust and accurate testing. Yeah, that has been part of the equation that the business community has participated in because of, again, we need certainty. We need certainty within our workforce as well. But if you're more you test, the more you're going to see outcomes, right? And then contact tracing comes into the mix too, which is also a little bit controversial. So, here's the thing: we recognize as the statewide business organization, as yours does, is that we need to push against the spread of the virus. We want to keep it as minimal and manageable as possible, keeping an eye on those key indicators. And I think again, key indicator is obviously deaths. We don't want any of those, but how many individuals are in the hospital and how many of those are in ICU beds? Because that's the capacity that we have to keep an eye on. When those get exacerbated, that's when we're in trouble. And that's what the governor was seeking to do in his executive orders at the early phases that had broad support because we need to manage it, right? Yeah. So it doesn't manage us. But there's a balance here, right? And the governor sees this. We may disagree on some of the timing and the breadth of things, but the bottom line is we need to manage the virus, but at the same time, we have to keep our economy rolling. Yeah. And what does that mean? Well, we can't put us so deeply into a recession that we can't recover from it.
How close are we to that, Doug, in your opinion?
The longer this goes, the closer we get. How about that? and the markets respond to that. And I think the key driver to this is the consumer.
Mm-hmm.
Where's consumer confidence?
Low.
And it followed unemployment. Actually, it was real deep in, if I have the right, March and April, May, started recovering in June. It's kind of plateaued. But until the consumer is fully back into the marketplace, and by the way, consumption has changed. Let's acknowledge that.
Yeah.
So even with changes in consumption, which is a disruptor for certain sectors, certainly. But if the consumer isn't confident with where they are economically, and they're not willing to go back into the marketplace, those two combine into a really destructive force. And the longer that persists, the longer this economic downturn will be with us.
Yeah.
So you can measure unemployment. We're doing that, but we also are working on ways. How do we measure consumer confidence?
Yeah. I was having
bring it back.
Yeah. I was having a conversation with one of my retail members yesterday. And, we were talking about how his numbers were, and he's 15% down. He's like, and that's good. I said, did you ever think that you would say that's good when prior to this he was having record years? And he said he's finding that it is that demand. It's not even the consumer confidence, but that this has shifted the way we as consumers think about what we need versus, oh, I'm gonna head out and buy a new jacket or a new shirt or And he said it's not that people don't have money, it's that they just are not spending it the way they used to. So, that's maybe pandemic caused, but is that, are we going to get back to, I know I don't need that shirt, but I'm going to go get it anyway. I mean, that's kind of the, the fallout.
So
of what we're
if you're not sure where your paycheck is next week or 3 months or 6 months, what are you doing, with your consumption that then has an impact on the broader economy? So that's a key ingredient, I think, in addition to everything else that we're tracking. So I've been challenging the team to look harder at this question of consumer confidence as an important indicator in this recession, because it's so different than previous ones. So, but again, Minnesota did not go into the recession as deep as other states in almost every measurable way. We went in not doing as well as some other states. The reality is that we should come out reasonably well, but are we going to be positioned then for the future?
Yeah.
Are we going to have the right pieces to our economy ready to go? And I believe with some thought, we can build up those investments in those areas. And one of those is workforce, right? We are going to need a workforce again.
Yeah.
It's going to be different. Post-COVID, how people work has changed.
Where people work has changed.
Yes, where they work, how they work, but we're still going to need workers.
Yeah.
And we went into this with a shortage. And when the recession, when we're through this pandemic recession and COVID is behind us, we're going to need workers. And we got to make sure that we are attracting and nurturing our population to make sure that we have those key sectors covered. Otherwise, they won't grow here in Minnesota, and we want them to grow here.
Yeah, we got to stop our high school grads from leaving. Keep them here, right?
Keep them here, attract them here, not just from places like South Dakota, but we got to attract them from around the globe. Yeah, right. I think we have a unique asset in that we still are a relatively affordable state. We've been creeping up in costs, something we need to be thinking about as a state. But if we're competing with states that are less affordable, we have a high quality of life, then we can be an attractive place for talent to arrive, hopefully stay. Yeah. Some of the societal or racial unrest is something we need to think hard about. How do we address that to make sure that is not something that inhibits growth here in Minnesota?
Let's talk about that, Doug, because the chamber has always been very good about having their priorities and having them from the voice of the businesses statewide. You guys do a great job through the federation of bringing that voice to your table and then determining, you may think this is a hot issue, and then you hear from your members and the businesses in the state, and you fight for what they need. In pre-pandemic, we had the usual suspects, and you've talked about a few of them: taxes, healthcare, mandates. Then we get hit with COVID, George Floyd's death, police reform, and then the ensuing economic crisis. So now, as the chamber advocating on all of these issues, where do you even begin now to unpack all of this and strategize on still focusing on the things that were important before, all this hit, and then addressing, to your point, the civil unrest and the racial inequality and all of the things that also need to be changed? How do you do that?
Well, first of all, we identify our lane, meaning we're going to work on statewide policies that relate to, first and foremost, in my mind, how do we accomplish economic recovery? What do we need to do now to make sure that we have those building blocks of our economy in place, whether it be around our tax or regulatory environment or our healthcare policies? So all those things continue. At the same time, we want to look short-term around what can we do to, I use the word carefully, stimulate the economy. What can we do to make sure that we're investing in key areas for economic growth? What are the building blocks of really the new economy post-COVID? Some of those key ones are we investing in infrastructure adequately? Are we investing in our workforce correctly? Where does a child care formula fit into this short and long term? What are we doing about education? Prior to COVID, we were talking about fundamentally shifting how we set up our K-12 systems. Do we return to some of that as well? Then there's the connectivity question, right?
Yeah.
Most people call it broadband, but how do we connect people? Broadband is part of that equation. And that's not just in greater Minnesota, it's here in the metropolitan area as well. You still have pieces of connectivity and the system's being really stretched right now.
Yeah.
We need to continue to invest in that to make sure that we have connectivity across the state as we think about the work of the future. So there are definite things that we can be doing to set the table for our future. And then longer term, we're thinking about what do we need to do to get ready for 2030. We have a decade in front of us. What's manufacturing look like in 10 years? Where will our natural resources be? How do we continue to carefully and environmentally harvest that in a sensitive way, whether it be agriculture or mining? Those things that have built our economy, made us unique, we need to continue to think about those for the future. So we have a lot to work on. We sort through these things, Angie, with the help of chambers like yours, from our members, which are incredibly diverse all across the state, large and small companies. And we build that agenda based upon their input. And we're constantly seeking that input. Not just through membership surveys, but we do focus groups. We have our federation program that you've helped out in. And then we have committees and we have our board, and we blend that together into a common narrative around the things that we uniquely as a group stand for. And then we go to work on it. And it's an art, developing policy around those things that we need to be working on collectively. And surprisingly, we get it right, and we can do it with consensus.
Speaking of consensus, there is, yesterday in your morning digest from the Minnesota Chamber, you highlighted an article where the governor is saying, wonder if I'd have been, a little more bipartisan at the beginning of this crisis, where we'd be right now. Obviously, partisanship and that great divide impacts the way you and your lobbying team, who are amazing, by the way, can work and get things done. And I can't remember a time, at least in the 10 years where I've been in the chamber, that it has been quite this divided and just not even discussions. It feels like all the votes are just party line, no talking. What do you see that? And do you think, had he done that, had the governor taken a more bipartisan approach, we'd have seen anything different? Or was this pandemic going to run its course regardless?
Well, first of all, I think from a standpoint of the governor, he needed to exercise his executive powers in order to move things very, very swiftly. Things don't move swiftly at the legislature. And in order for the state to be in a preparedness position to mitigate the impact of the virus and to contain it as we got ready for it, right? Going back to hospitalizations and ICUs, there was a clear goal of making sure that those had the capacity to address the pandemic. Otherwise, you have a serious a public health crisis. And so he exercised that. And there's the broader things that, go into that, as far as, notifying, working with the legislature, seeking their input. And that applies to the policy making process too. What you see many times in the headlines are the battles, right?
Yeah.
The news media, bless them, love them, but they like to focus on the battle, right? The scrimmage, the game. Behind the scenes, there's actually more bipartisanship going on than most people will see.
It's good to know.
Bills that need to get done in a relatively calm environment, and they meet their deadlines. It's the things that are more divisive that wait till the end and don't get done because there's a lack of consensus yet. A bonding bill being one of those, right? This year, and the tax bill that's connected to it that we would like to get done. For me, I'll give you an example. We've been pushing for conformity around Section 179. You're familiar with this, but I'm guessing a lot of your members are aware of it, but don't know what it's called. The Section 179 is the federal tax code that deals with accelerated depreciation. The 2017 federal tax bill accelerated that, and then you need to have states to conform to it. Minnesota attaches its tax code to the federal tax code, and we have yet to conform to the federal level of accelerated depreciation under Section 179, and there's broad bipartisan support to do it. But yet it hasn't gotten done.
Why?
You would think it'd be simple.
Nothing.
I mean, 2 years in a row, we've asked the question at our session priorities dinner of the governor and the 4 legislative leaders, and everybody's in agreement. Yes, this should get done. We will get it done. And yet here we are 3 years of still waiting for it to be completed. There is support for it, but it does need, there is some consequences to the state's fiscal position. And it is a tax bill. And sometimes those get more complex because of the things that are wrapped around it. So, but there's broad support for it. There's bipartisan support for it. So it's not a partisan issue. It's just a matter of how do we, make it happen in a way that we'd like to see it get done in a timely way. So yes, it's a lot of game. But in the end, we pull votes from where we can get them, whether it be Democrat or Republican, to build a coalition of the willing to get progress made on the things that we think will matter to our state's economic health.
Yeah. Okay. I could talk to you all day, and I told you 30 minutes, and I want to be respectful of that. So one question before we close it out. Well, 2 questions, 2 quick ones. You mentioned local chambers a lot in the course of our conversation today. And, the Shakopee Chamber has been a member of the Minnesota Chamber predating my term here. And now I am fortunate enough to still be a member and have a seat on your board right now. But local chambers are suffering. We talk about small businesses struggling, and local chambers, I think, are the ultimate small business, right? And our job is to support small business, but yet we were excluded from federal CARES money. And alarming data is out there that 40% of chambers in the U.S. may not be here 6 months from now, a year from now. How is the Minnesota Chamber working to support them? And as somebody who's been in this world for a long time, what does that look like for the business community? I think a town, I grew up in Albert Lea, Minnesota, and my dad's office was right next to the Chamber of Commerce. I've been a big fan of the Green Jackets for my whole life. And I can't imagine ever living in a community without a Chamber of Commerce. But that might be our new reality post-COVID. What do we do, Doug?
Well, clearly, what we want to do is encourage businesses to support their local chamber. Clearly, the way you described it is that chambers are part of the fabric of successful communities. Here in the Metro, there are a lot of communities and a lot of local chambers. In Greater Minnesota, there's successful communities with successful chambers, just like there is here in the Metro. And you can't have a successful business community without supporting your local chamber, because they bring people together, they connect interests, and they advocate on their behalf. And nobody's going to do that unless there's a local chamber leading the way. So with talented people like yourself, Angie, with support from members like that you have, those chambers can navigate this. It's going to be hard. The business model of local chambers has a lot resting on events. When people can't gather, it's hard to bring those programs together and provide support to that chamber. So it depends on how they are constructed as a business. What demonstrates how some are vulnerable. But here's the good news: is that local chambers are innovating, just as the state chamber has innovated. They've been very conscientious and judicious with their resources, and they've gone back to their members to say, "We need your support now more than ever." Yep, there are businesses that are struggling, that don't have the revenue to support their local chamber, but there are other businesses that are surviving and doing well during COVID, and that they need to step forward to support their local chambers in their communities, so that fabric can remain strong today as it was in the past, as it will be in the future.
Yeah.
So my message to your members is support your local chamber.
Now that just sounds like a self-serving question, and that was not my intent.
But it's meaningful. It's a really meaningful. You provide a meaningful service to the business community and to the community.
Yeah.
And that's something we need to continue to support. So at the state chamber, we've been helping local chambers understand the challenges that you're facing, how you can bring solutions to your members. We've tried to make it as simple as for you to navigate that with us. At the same time, we've helped you stay connected to your colleagues around the state and around the country, so that you're innovating around your programs and your services and your events, so that you can be successful today and tomorrow.
Yeah.
So
it's all about the pivot, right? Yeah.
It is being nimble.
Yeah,
right?
You have to be. And that's what we would tell any of our members who called us and said, we're struggling. I'm in what do I do? It's like, all right, let's figure out how we change it up a little bit. Right. I took a class at Institute, which I know you're familiar. It's a program in the U.S. Chamber. And I love the title of it. It's called Innovate or Die. And I think now more than ever, it's good advice. It's kind of a harsh title for a college level class, but it made sense to me. So Doug, what's next for the Minnesota Chamber as far as your priorities? I mean, where do you focus this year? What's next for you guys, and what can the business community do to support you in that effort?
Well, thank you. Our priority is helping our businesses survive the economic downturn. What are we doing to inform them and keep them connected? And I'll tell you, I've sensed that, as you know, after the initial shock of the pandemic and the deep economic decline, that businesses have looked up now and they've innovated internally. Now they're looking to innovate externally, and they're seeking to grow their market share in the new economy. And they're looking around and they're looking for ways to make connections, and they're looking to chambers to do it, because they can't do it by going to down the street or 2 towns away or do another state physically to do it. Now they're looking for that connector. And in many cases, the chamber can be that connector. And with the virtual aspects of technology, now we can be that connector in even a more efficient way. So now if you're in Warroad, Minnesota, you can connect with somebody in Austin, Minnesota pretty well with technology, with the chamber helping you to do it. So that's been a new reality for us that we have seen as an opportunity. So keeping our members alive and well and connected during the pandemic and its recession is our first big piece. The second one is really looking hard at this racial equity equation of the state, and the business purpose for engaging in this conversation around diversity and inclusion, because it's an economic imperative of our state as a workforce equation, as a reputational equation. We need to step into that. So that's another piece that we're working on. But more largely, all this contributes to a narrative around how do we restore our economic future? How do we prepare for a year from now and 10 years from now? So thinking towards 2030. What are the things we can do now to rebuild our economy and prepare for the future? That's what's in our strategic plan that we're working on right now with our board of directors that you've participated in. And what are the building blocks of that, and what can the chamber do to nurture it? And then work with our friends, local chambers, trade associations in the state, to be on a common agenda to protect and nurture our economy.
It's going to take all of us. Doug, I want to thank you not only for your time today, but for the work you do on behalf of all businesses in Minnesota. And I think it's important to point out that It's not just your members, you or any chamber. The work we do helps all businesses, whether you are financially supporting us and a member of our team or not. So thank you for all the work that you do for the businesses from border to border, and for all the work you do for the local chambers. I will tell you, during this pandemic, I've always had, the Minnesota Chamber page, bookmarked, but I referred to it on the daily. You and your team have done a tremendous job in keeping us all informed on the ever-changing landscape. And I also want to thank our sponsors at St. Francis Regional Medical Center for making this happen. And until next week, Chamber friends, be well. And remember the 3 W's: wash your hands, wear your mask, and watch your distance. We'll see you next week. This podcast is sponsored by St. Francis Regional Medical Center. St. Francis Southbridge Urgent Care is open during convenient daytime, evening, and weekend hours. Friendly providers can treat you on a walk-in basis, and Southbridge Urgent Care also offers free online check-in, so you can wait for your appointment in the comfort of your own home. Southbridge Urgent Care is conveniently located in Shakopee across from Sam's Club. Visit stfrancis-shakopee.com/urgent care for details.